everyone, Clio here, and today is the second part to a three-part series that I'm doing this month, and that is going to be a unhaul. So the first part of this series was an unhaul of the books that I read in 2020, so me going over every single book that I unhauled that I did read in 2020. Second part that I'm doing now is an unhaul of my physical TBR, and then the third part will be me going through these shelves again and figuring out if some of the books that I have read can go. So the main goal about all of this is that I started this sort of project a year and a half ago or something, where I wanted to clean up these shelves. I wanted to get my physical TBR reduced, and I have been able to do quite a lot of that reduction already at this point. So I did an unhaul a year and a half ago, and at this point, so I'm pre-filming this in September, at this point there are still 122 unread books on this shelf, which is a reduction from the 150 that I got that I started with, and I think by December I could definitely get it down a lot more as well if I really set my mind to it. But if I'm being honest, a lot of those 122 books still aren't the books that I want to be reading, so I definitely still want to do another browse through these shelves, trying to get some of these books down again. So I'm going to do it, so I'm going to go through these shelves, I'm going to be strict about it, I'm going to get rid of a lot of books, I hope, and I'm also going to have some of these books on a sort of maybe pile. I have a maybe shelf that I did nothing with in this year. I'm going to be hopefully quite strict with those books, but in any case I'm going to follow through with my original plan for that maybe shelf and do a chapter, like a try chapter tag with the books that will be on the maybe shelf at the end of this video, and then hopefully through some criteria I can get that reduced even more. My original goal was to get this list down to 100 by the end of 2020. I think I can absolutely do that, but I want to go even further. So without further ado, let's start. So basically on the first shelf that we are taking into account, which is now falling over because of the books that I took out of it, we have classics. So the first one of these, I'm already gonna tell you it's going. It's Gulliver's Travel by Jonathan Swift. I had to read part of this for university. Didn't like it, so why would I continue with it now? Moonstone by Wilkie Collins. You can see it's a very damaged one, heavily, like it's a second-hand book, but I do actually want to keep it, and actually, who knows, maybe I will have read it by the time this book goes up, because it's probably a good one for October. So going on the staying pile. Frenchman's Creek by Daphne du Maurier, definitely staying. The Enchanted April by Elizabeth von Arnim, also staying. A Memoir of Jane Austen. You know, I don't necessarily want to get rid of it, but am I going to read it? No, so why would I keep it? Going on the tossing it. Lucy Worsley's Jane Austen at Home, another non-fiction about Jane Austen. And I think if I'm going to keep a non-fiction about Jane Austen, I'm going to keep this one, and I'm going to put it on the maybe pile. The Old Curiosity Shop, that's a tongue twister. The Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens. I have a goal of reading all of Charles Dickens' works, so yes, this is definitely staying. Same goes for The Pickwick Papers by Charles Dickens. Yep, staying. Alright, so the second shelf, I don't know if you can see it fully, but it's been kind of hammered. It's been hit heavily. A lot of those books I hadn't read yet. So we'll see what I do with that. That is also a classic shelf. So we have A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway, keeping it. Moll Flanders by Daniel Defoe, keeping it. For Whom the Bell Tolls by Ernest Hemingway, keeping it. I definitely intend to get rid of some books. The Mysterious Island by Jules Verne, keeping it. Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne, keeping it. Lord of the Flies by William Golding. I actually have this book twice on my shelves, I know, but I am keeping that one. Great Short Works of Herman Melville. I'm going to put it on the maybe pile. I read Moby Dick, hated Moby Dick. Moby Dick is one of my least liked classics, and it's actually still on that shelf, so maybe something to go in the next video. But I wanted to give some of his other writing a go and see whether, you know, in short story format I might like his writing. Because I think if you reduce Moby Dick by a whole lot of pages, it might actually be worth something to me. But I'm gonna put it on a maybe pile because am I tempted to read this? No. Portrait of a Lady by Henry James. I have two Henry James here. Where's the other one? The other one is Wings of the Dove. And I will say I've had these editions for a super long time and I'm never tempted to pick them up. And I also don't hear a lot of people talk about Henry James. You know, I don't see a lot of people reading these. So maybe I'm going to put them on the maybe pile and figure out which one of these two I'm going to keep. In any case, these editions were really like €2, so if at some point I read one of these two and want to continue with more Henry James, I can easily get my hands on one of these again, I'm pretty sure. Next we have The Last Man by Mary Shelley, keeping it. Tender is the Night by F. Scott Fitzgerald, keeping it. The Lost World and Other Stories by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, keeping it. The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. I don't know whether I'm actually interested in reading this book or not, but it's such a classic that I should actually just figure out a little bit more about what it is about and figure out whether I actually want to read it. So that's going on the maybe pile. The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte. I'm hoping that by the time you're watching this video I've actually read this one. So keeping it. Same goes for Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. If by the time that this video goes live, I should have at least tried this book because I put it on my pile of possibilities for October. And if I didn't like it, I should get rid of this book because that will be the third time that I try to read it. However, it fits in so nicely with my other Bronte books that maybe I'll just keep it for the aesthetics. And then Ivanhoe by Sir Walter Scott. Maybe. It's a book that I would automatically put on the yes pile just because of it's a big name and it's like a sort of piece of classic literature that I want to give a go. But on the other hand, I also have no idea what it is about, so perhaps I should just figure out what it's about first. Next up, this shelf contains only one unread book, and that is Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, which is definitely staying. So next shelf contains my Spanish language and my Asian literary novels. So the Spanish ones are definitely in the Spanish language and they're not all from Spain or Latin American or something like that. They're just in Spanish language. And then the Asian ones are usually in English but have some in Dutch as well. But a lot of those are read, as you can see. But so let's go through the ones that I still have left. So I have the Don Quixote Part 1, Don Quixote Part 2, keeping them. This is my, I would say, if I have to say my most daunting read, it would be the Don Quixote. So if somebody can tell me that the Don Quixote is actually super easy to get through, even though it's 1,500 pages, let me know. Then I have Kraken by China Miéville. So this is an example. I don't think that this is a Spanish author, but I bought the Spanish edition when I was living in Spain to kind of brush up on my Spanish. But I started this out and I didn't really get the hook. It might just be because it is in Spanish and it was weird for me to read sci-fi, which what I think it is in Spanish. So I think I'm going to put it in a maybe pile just because it does interest me. You know, it has a octopus type of a monster in it, which I find intriguing. So I'm going to put it on the maybe pile for now. Then we have Love in a Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, keeping it. Then another one for the maybe pile. This is Carlos Fuentes, Cambio de Piel. This is basically something that I got off a library sale, and because it's Carlos Fuentes and that's a big name in Spanish literature, I wanted it also just because it is one of those gorgeous old leather-bound editions. But in all honesty, I don't know what it's about, and so I also haven't felt any sort of intrigue to pick it up. So going on the maybe pile. Beijing Coma by Ma Tian, keeping it. Dreams of Joy by Lisa C. I am getting rid of this one, and the reason is that it is a sequel. This is the second book in a series. Don't know the first one, and also I am not necessarily super intrigued. This is another one that's like a €2 book that I just like picked up because I have read a Lisa C and liked it. But I'm also not super intrigued with that being like, if I'm going to be exploring more Asian literature, I don't think Lisa C is the author that I personally want to read more of. Then we get Saving Fish from Drowning by Amy Tan, which is not another one of those apparently, though I don't think I paid full price for this in any case. What to do with this one? I will temporarily put it on the maybe pile, but I'm tempted to get rid of it. And then we get to Human Acts by Han Kang, keeping it. So this is becoming very disorganized beneath me. I'm gonna hate myself for this when I have to actually clean this thing up. Next we get to a shelf that's going to be very easy to go through because it is mostly recent purchases. There's one exception. And yeah, I'm expecting to keep all of them except that one. So we have Stranger Dreamer by Laini Taylor, keeping it. Little Eyes by Samantha Schwebling, keeping it. Hopefully I've read by now. A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab, keeping it. Cleopatra by Alberto Ancela, keeping it. Meanwhile in Dopamine City by DBC Pierre, keeping it. Orfeo by Richard Powers, keeping it. Actress by Anne Enright, keeping it. Weather by Jenny Offel, keeping it. Umbrella by Will Self, tossing it. So this is the one book that is another one of those cases, you know, I really just shouldn't do bargain shopping because this is another one of those, which is like €4 in this sort of like big book sale thingy that I must have been intrigued at the time, but I'm not even going to bother to look up the premise at this point. I'm just tossing it. And then final one, The Leopard by Giuseppe Tomasi di Lampedusa, keeping it. So while I said I was going to toss a whole lot, the keeping it pile is definitely the biggest one at the moment. Now the bottom shelf that you can actually not see does not have any unread books, so we can immediately move on to the top shelf here, which is way too high. Alright, I got all of them, so diving back in. How much minutes do I have left before this thing? Yeah, it'll be fine. So, We Are the Weather by Jonathan Safran Foer, keeping it. Captain Corelli's Mandolin by Louis de Bernier, I think, keeping it. The New York Trilogy by Paul Astor. So the New York Trilogy by Paul Astor. No, I read the first one of these, City of Glass, and I actually did a paper on it. And I actually quite liked it, but I've never been intrigued to finish this trilogy. I'm gonna put it on the maybe pile. Maybe it's really just like me procrastinating on making a decision. An Artist of the Floating World by Kazuo Ishiguro, keeping it. Beatrice and Virgil by Jan Marcel. I would say keeping it, because the cover just is gorgeous, and I loved the movie For Life of Pi, I haven't read the book, but this is really consistently on my list of lowest rated books on Goodreads, so I'm gonna check it out why people dislike it. Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde by Juno Diaz, keeping it. Swing Time by Zadie Smith, keeping it. Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes, keeping it. The Spy by Paulo Coelho, keeping it. A Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole. This is actually, I think, on my list of books that I want to read by the end of 2020, but I think I'm going to put it on the maybe pile. I've had a friend read it who didn't like it, so I think I want to figure out a little bit more about what people think of this book. Augustus by John Williams, keeping it. Butcher's Crossing by John Williams, keeping it. In a little bit this is going to be bigger than my cat, but let's hope that we get through a little bit more before we get there. Alright, I see I accidentally skipped one, so I went to this shelf, but there's still that shelf, so let's change the order a little bit here and do the black and white books. So we have Atonement by Ian McEwan, keeping it. The Glass Castle by Janet Walls, keeping it. The Corrections by Jonathan Franzen, keeping it. Dark Places by Gillian Flynn, keeping it. The Mysterious Flame of Queen Loana, keeping it, because I want to try some Umberto Eco, because I've heard so many good things about it. I've mainly heard good things about this Name of the Rose, but I have this one, so I'll read that one. War and War by Laszlo Krasznahorkai, keeping it. The English Patient by Michael Ondaatje, definitely keeping it. Love that movie, need to read this book. Trainspotting by Irvin Welsh, this is a little bit of a dilemma. So I've tried to read this, but it's written in like, I don't know whether it's actually Scots or whether this is just like I don't even know what Scots is text. So, but it's written in a way that's like a phonetic representation of the way that Scottish people speak. And I found it just so difficult to get into. But maybe if I just push through the beginning, I get used to the way that it's written, and so I will enjoy it. So I'm gonna keep this one. Second edition of Lord of the Flies by William Golding. We'll keep it for the time being. It just counts as one, so. Arthur and George by Julian Barnes, putting it on a maybe pile. This is a book that I got for free from, like, my mother sometimes scours these sort of like free libraries that there are in like hotels sometimes, and she brings me back books, and I will say I've read 0 of those books that she brought me back, so I should tell her to stop doing that. Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. Heard mixed things, so that's kind of making me hesitant to go into it, but I definitely do want to try it out myself. Alright, The Blue Shelf. Juliet Naked, Nick Hornby, keeping it. The Children Act, Ian McEwan, keeping it. The Essex Serpent by Sarah Perry. As much as it pains me to make this decision, I'm putting it on the maybe pile because I bought this for the cover. I don't know whether this is actually something that I would like. And the Mountains Echoes by Khaled Husseini, keeping it. I Have Lost My Way by Gail Foreman, keeping it. On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong, keeping it. 1000 Autumns of Jacob de Zoet, keeping it. Catch-22 by Joseph Heller, another one of these that I bought because it's such a big name. I don't really know too much about. It is on my 2020 TBR, but I have felt no inclination to pick it up, so it's going on the maybe pile. She by H. Rider Haggard, maybe pile. History of Wolves by Emily Friedlund, keeping it. I am definitely gonna get rid of some books at some point, I promise you guys. So, Gingerbread by Helen Oyeyemi. That's a dilemma. It is one of my most lowest rated books on Goodreads when I check my TBR, but I also saw Emma from Drinking by My Shelf really love this one. She didn't like it the first time she read it, but she loved it the second time she read it. However, do I want to keep a book that you need 2 times to read before you enjoy it? Maybe not, but I definitely want to try it out myself first. Northwest by Zadie Smith, keeping it. Heat and Other Stories by Joyce Carol Oates, keeping it just because I want to try some Joyce Carol Oates. Grim Tales by Philip Pullman, keeping it. And Oscar and Lucinda by Peter Carey, keeping it. I am not making any progress this way. Next shelf is the Brandon Sanderson shelf plus Empire Trilogy, but the Empire Trilogy is going to soon have to find a new location because when the 4th book for Stormlight Archive arrives. This shelf is going to be almost full, especially since I still need to get the third book in the Mistborn series, which I will get for Christmas. So this shelf will be filling itself with Brandon Sanderson. And then we get to the aforementioned maybe shelf. So I'm expecting some progress when we get to this shelf. So voila, one entirely empty shelf. So let me give you some context about this so that you can properly hate me depending on which choices I make here. But I made this selection more than a year ago of books that I wasn't sure I wanted to keep. I was gonna do a try chapter tag with them to see which one I was going to keep, which ones I wasn't, which I never did. And in that year and a half, I think I've considered reading 2 of these. So that should mean that a lot is going to be tossed. Let's start off. There's actually a book that I've already read on here, but because the sequels are on here unread, I'm going to address them together, and that is A Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness. So don't come at me for this decision, but I'm tossing them. I read the first one, have a review up for the first one, and I actually gave it 2 goes. So I read it a couple of years ago, didn't like it, then I watched the TV show, quite liked the TV show, just for the sort of like guilty pleasure of it. So I tried to get into the books again and consider them as guilty pleasure reads, but even that way I couldn't get through I got through that first book, but it was so cringy, I was so annoyed with the characters all the time that it just wasn't a fun experience. But I had bought all of these because a friend of mine really loved this series, and so now I'm stuck with all 3 of them, and that is a shout. Then that is a tip to all of you out there: do not buy a full series until you've read the first book. But so I am getting rid of these. Next up is one of the 2 books I have considered, and that is The Blade itself by Joe Abercrombie, so that one is staying. Ministry of Utmost Happiness by Arundhati Roy. I am going to keep it, but I have started Gods of Small Things at some point, and the problem is I couldn't focus on that. I was reading it as an audiobook and I just got so lost all of the time, and that has tainted my like anticipation for this book. So I just constantly feel like I'm not going to enjoy this one, even though like I should just give it a physical try, and then just maybe I'll figure out that the whole problem was that I couldn't focus on it because of the like strange names that I'm not as accustomed with, that would have in an audiobook format doesn't really work for me. So I'm keeping it, but if in a year I haven't read it, then it needs to go. Women in Love by D.H. Lawrence. Have heard good things about it, but in all honesty, I really don't have an interest, so I'm tossing it. Gone by Michael Grant. Another one of these that I kept holding on to because I was like, yeah, but it's going to be a super quick read once I read it, but in all honesty, I don't have a need for YA dystopia at this point in my life, so I'm getting rid of this. 1,000 Acres by Jane Smiley is going on the maybe pile because this is not one of those books that my mother saved off of the shelf for me. I have 0 interest in this based off of the cover, but I cannot think of her name right now, but there's a booktuber who read this book somewhere last year. She was also doing a cleanup project of her entire shelves, reading all of them. She read this one, she liked it, so now I'm conflicted. So it's going into the maybe one. Damned by Chuck Palahniuk, going. I already tried that once. So that is actually a book I tried once, couldn't get into, and kept on the maybe shelf, but now it's just going. The Gathering by Anne Enright, going. A Sense of Direction. I have no idea what this book is about. So for the time being, let me put it on the maybe shelf. Unless by Carol Shields, going. The Greatcoat by Helen Dunmore, another one of these that is always on my lowest rated pile. And in all honesty, I think it's just like a mystery or a thriller, which I don't even like reading. So toss it. This is The Studio Game by Peter Burnett. maybe pile, need to figure out what it's about. Labyrinth by Kate Moss. I'm just going to toss it. It's a series. I have no idea what it's about. It has been in my vicinity for so long that if I was intrigued, I would have picked it up. This is another one of those books that my mother saved for me. Snow Queen, Michael Cunningham, tossing it. I Am a Cat by Soseki Natsume is another one of those two books that I have thought about reading in this year, so keeping it. The Narrow Road to the Deep North. Basically, there's only one reason I bought this book, and that is because it won the Man Booker Prize. But I now know that with winners to the Man Booker Prize, I don't have a good track record. You know, I liked Girl, Woman, Other, didn't like The Testament, didn't like Milkman by... So actually those are the only two, so maybe I should give it a go. No, I really don't. I really feel like I tried to get into this one at some point, and then I heard some things about how it's like a struggle to get through and stuff like that, and I'm just really not looking forward to it. It's not sparking joy, it's going. The Walk by Philippe Petit. This is a book about this guy who did like a high wire walk between the two towers of the World Trade Center. I saw this movie, really not this movie, I saw the documentary about it. I was really intrigued, and when I came across this very short book, I was very wanted to read it, so I'm going to keep it. Let the Great World Spin by Colin McCann. Unsure about that one. So, this is actually about exactly the same thing. So it says, New York, August 1974. A man is walking in the sky. Between the newly built twin towers, the man twirls through the air. Far below, the lives of complete strangers spin towards each other. It might be nice to read them together. So in the end, out of those, I just kept 4, I believe. Maybe 5. And I did toss quite a lot of these and kept a few for the maybe pile, so maybe we'll still be tossing them later on. Maybe I need to do a separate video for the maybe pile. Maybe this is going to be a 4-part series at this point. There's a book missing from this pile because it is on my TBR. So that is the Traitor Spy trilogy by Trudy Canavan. Keeping them, I do definitely want to get around to the first book in the series. It's been on my pile possibilities for the last 2 months, but it's just a little bit too long to fit in with some of my goals. Emperor of the Eight Islands by Leon Hearn. I've actually heard some negative reviews about this one, but I do still want to give it a go. It's a fantasy, it's Asian fantasy, so I definitely want to try it. And then we have Birth of a Killer by Darren Shan. I love Darren Shan. I love his Saga of Darshan or Cirque du Freak, whatever the name is of that 12-part series. 12-part series, it's probably just out of view. So I love that one. And this is about one of the main characters within that saga. It's the background story to one of those. But I feel like this is fine. This lives in a perfect place in my memory, and I haven't felt a need to dive into the background story of this other character. So why would I? Why would I do it if there's a potential of me not liking it as much? So I'm going to get rid of it. Alright, close to finishing shelf number 2. The bottom shelf, which you cannot see, has 2 unread books. This is my Dutch book collection, and so it has Jij zegt het by Connie Palmen. This book is actually out in English, I think, at this point. And it is actually about, what's the name of the author? Sylvia Plath. Want to read this one, keeping it. And then we have Het Huis van de Moskee by Kader Abdullah, keeping it. My cat is like looking at this like, where am I supposed to sit? I know, Buffy. Sorry. Top shelf. Don't have any unread books, though technically I haven't read the illustrated Harry Potters. And I'm not entirely sure that I will ever do so now. But who knows? Maybe in a couple of years. Maybe in a couple of years I have the mental space where I can disassociate J.K. Rowling from Harry Potter, or I will have finally made the decision that I'm getting rid of my Harry Potters. But you know, Harry Potter has been such a big part of my reading life, it's very much a big part of the reason that I read, that there is this sort of sentimental clinging to it. So I'm gonna keep them there for the moment. Then on this one I only have one unread book, and that is William S. by Anthony Horowitz. I like Anthony Horowitz, I've read a whole lot of Anthony Horowitz, but this book has been on those shelves for such a long time and I've never read it, never felt the inclination to read it, so I'm tossing it. This one only has 2 unread books, and that is King of Foxes by Raymond E. Feist. As much as I want to dive into more Raymond E. Feist, this is the second in this series, and so I'm going to get rid of it. I bought it in a thrift shop, and honestly speaking, if I'm going to be trying out more Raymond E. Feist, it's going to be another book of his. And then we have S by J.J. Abrams, which is probably my other most intimidating read on this shelf, because it's a gorgeous one and it's a very interactive one. So inside it looks like it's a different book, so Ship of Theseus by V.M. Straka, and it's going to have like all of these notes in it from somebody who has read Ship of Theseus. It's going to have a lot of meta levels to it, which is something that I absolutely adore in literature. It's probably one of the reasons why I'm so damn afraid to read it. Next one has a couple of books on it. It has House Moving Castle by Diane Wynne Jones, keeping it. House of Many Ways by Diane Wynne Jones, keeping it. Then we have The Lives of Locke Lamora. It's quite a recent one on my shelves, keeping it. And then we have Library of Souls by Ransom Riggs, and this one is getting tossed. I like the first 2 just fine, but I have no inclination to dive back into the series. I would have to reread at this point to do it, and I didn't like the first 2 well enough to do it. So getting rid of all 3 of those, so also the original ones that I did read. Alright, final 2 shelves I'm combining because there are not that many books on there. And so that will be the end of this when we get through this one. State of Fear, Michael Crichton, keeping it. The Shadow of What Was Lost by James Islington, keeping it. Waking Gods by Sylvan Newell is another one that I'm tempted to toss, because I didn't like the first book, Sleeping Giants, as much as I thought I was going to, or as much as some other people do. But I do want to reread Sleeping Giants and then make up my mind. So at the moment it is being kept. Winter's Promise by Christelle Davos, keeping it. Master of Sorrows by Justin Cole, Jesus, keeping it. And then On the Come Up by Angie Thomas, keeping it. Whew. I'm looking at a disaster. Just out of frame here, but yeah, the keeping it pile is definitely the biggest, but the toss it pile ends up being quite a nice one after all. And I have a big stack for the maybe pile as well that I do think I'm going to do in a separate video now. So I'm going to do some research into these, like what is the average Goodreads rating for all of these, and what is the premise, does the premise sound promising? And then for the ones that I do find the premise promising, I might go into actual reviews and see what people are disliking about it, for example, and that way making my mind. As I think I said earlier, there are a couple of extra books that are actually on my shelves, but they are currently in my pile of possibilities for this month, and so I'm not going to unhaul them because I was planning to read them this month, meaning that I clearly still have enough of an interest in these. But so yeah, let me get back to you guys once I've gotten all of these back on my shelves, and once I've got the total number of books that I'm tossing within this video and books that I'm going to be exploring within a follow-up video. Alright, so I have put the books back on my shelf that I already know I'm going to keep. Now for the books that I'm tossing. So first of all, Birth of a Killer by Darren Shan, Gone by Michael Grant, The Great Code by Helen Dunmore, Unless by Carol Shields, The Gathering by Anne Enright, Damned by Chuck Palahniuk, Women in Love by D.H. Lawrence, Umbrella by Will Self, Dreams of Joy by Lisa C. A Memoir of Jane Austen by James Austin Lee. Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. Shadow of Night by Deborah Harkness. The Book of Life by Deborah Harkness. William S. by Anthony Horowitz. King of Foxes by Raymond E. Feist. The Book of Life by Deborah Harkness. Labyrinth by Kate Moss. The Snow Queen by Michael Cunningham. The Narrow Road to the Deep North by Richard Flanagan. And Library of Souls by Ransom Riggs. I do have 3 other books that I have already read which were part of those series, but they don't reduce my physical TBR. So hey guys, still past Clio, but a little bit more in the future than the clip that you just saw. So I just found out, like I just put a book on my October TBR. Then when I read the premise, when I was trying to explain it for my TBR video, I realized this book is not for me. So I'm also getting rid of this one. And that is The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins, because apparently this is a detective novel. I don't like detective novels, so I'm getting rid of it. It's not worth it to me, even if this is the exception to the rule. I know myself well enough. I've had to sit through 20,000 detective episodes and detective type plot movies in the past because my father is a huge fan, and I'm just never intrigued to find out who did it. So that's the whole reason for a detective novel. So yeah, I'm just getting rid of it. It doesn't, like, I'm not gonna waste my time trying to see if this one might be the exception. I will be so much happier with the space on my bookshelves and the space on my TBR and the possibility of one day having a 0 TBR. So based on that first cut, so the harsh cut, I'm already getting rid of 19 books. That would mean that at this point in time, when I'm filming this, that's a reduction of 19, and that would mean that my physical TBR is still 103 books. And so I can definitely make my aim of getting under 100 books on my physical TBR. I will put on the screen whatever that number is based on the current information at the time that this video is going to be out. But so yeah, you can expect another video in this series, so of me going through the maybe pile, which I'm going to estimate is some 25 books maybe. And so me going through that pile, figuring out which one of those I want to keep and which one of those are getting tossed. So I'm very happy with this progress. Not so happy with the fact that I now have to lug these to the Oxfam second-hand bookshop. But hey, they're out of my life. That guilt of having owned them and not having read them, I can easily get rid of it by doing it to a second-hand bookstore. And a lot of these were really books that made their way into my life randomly, or just because I don't have control over like buying habits apparently when books are extremely cheap. So there are lessons to be learned here, and I hope that I'll be learning them for the future.